Hello, this is the Kingston University Moving Image Department Lighting Workshop with me, Ken Evans. So let's start. Now, in my opinion, there are three different approaches to lighting, but don't panic. You don't need to be overwhelmed by lighting. Just remember that a lot of it is based on the natural elements of light that we see in our everyday lives. Often you just need to mimic this when you're working with your artificial lighting. I think it's very important to not be blown away by lighting and to approach it with a very common sense attitude, and you'll find that will serve you well. So, the first of my three approaches is trial and error. So you would go and hire yourself some lights or get some lights from somewhere, borrow them from a friend, and just go and play and see what you can come up with. That's the most basic way of getting to grips with lighting. It's just trial and error. Lighting routines. Now this is following fixed routines that you may have seen somewhere. 3-point lighting is an example of that. You may want to mimic stage lighting, where often the lights are placed below the artist and they shine up into the artist's face to give that particular theatrical look from a particular era when that lighting was popular. So in other words, you're following set routines of where lights are placed to give you a specific look. And the third approach would be creative analysis. So in other words, you've done the homework, you know how light behaves, you know how different types of light behave, you've assessed the scene and you're going to light it based on that knowledge of lighting. So that would be the third approach. Another good way of doing this, of course, is to watch films and work out where the lights are and what it is about that makes the shot right, what makes it look pretty or beautiful or nice, what makes it stand out from just regular stock standard photography. A little clue as well is to look at reflections, look at shadows, particularly look at people's eyes, because you can often see exactly where lights are positioned in relation to where people are, and even with regards to height as well. So yes, you can obtain a lot of information by just watching a film and continually analysing exactly where you think the lights might be, and maybe even make sketches and notes as well. So let's take it right back to the basics. What is light? So we've got obviously sunlight, and we've got reflections of things, for instance from water, that would reflect natural sunlight. We have man-made light, which would come from incandescent bulbs and things along those lines. And of course we have fire, although not necessarily man-made. It's certainly been harnessed by us. So at a basic level there, what we're dealing with in terms of light sources. Let's look at the electromagnetic spectrum. Now this is the range of electromagnetic radiation that gives us all these different types of light. Visible light is a minute section of that range of all these different kinds of light, such as ultraviolet and infrared, which are types of light that are just outside of our field of visible vision, if you like. They are detectable, of course, by infrared cameras or ultraviolet cameras. But don't forget that that also encompasses radio waves, microwaves, and goes right up to X and gamma rays. One thing I like to get across when I'm talking about the electromagnetic spectrum is just how narrow that visible band of light is compared to all the other wavelengths of light that are out there. And the analogy that I like to use, and this is a true analogy as well, it's not just one that's been plucked out of thin air, but if you imagine that you had a roll of film, a roll of let's say movie film, and it was as long as the land mass east to west in America, in the US. Now, I'm not sure exactly how many thousands of miles that is, but it's quite a few thousand miles. Now, if that were the electromagnetic spectrum going from east to west, the visible area of light on the electromagnetic spectrum would represent just a single frame, maybe somewhere in Iowa, just to the right of centre of that film strip that went across America. One single frame would represent just the amount of light that we can see. So you get an idea of just how much lies outside of what we can see. And what we can see is really just a tiny, tiny fraction of what's out there. So light that's emitted over the visible electromagnetic spectrum is white. In low light, we'll find that tonal variations are clear. And in bright light, we'll find that you'll need greater variations to see those tonal differences. And this is important when you're preparing scenes. It's even important if you're a costume designer and you're working with the director to understand when a particular costume might be used. And you might find that if it's being used outside, for instance, in very bright light, then you'll need to make these tonal variations in cloth, if this is dictated, of course, by the script or the storyteller. You'll need to make these differences greater, whereas it may not need to be that great if it's inside, maybe lit with just a couple of very small lights. In low light, both our own eyes and cameras have to increase the aperture to allow more light in, and this is what provides that tonal variation, because we're getting more information in terms of photons hitting the back of our eyes, and that's why that phenomena happens. Obviously too little light and you won't see anything at all. So I've tried to group together light into three types to make it quite simple. Now, so we have incident light, which is light falling on a subject from whatever source that may be, sunlight, incandescent light, etc. We have the surface brightness, that's the light that's reflected from a subject. And then we have the integrated reflective light, which is the amount of reflected light actually reaching the camera. So don't forget that although you may have light bouncing off of the subject, it's the amount that's reaching the camera that's really important to you as a cinematographer. The nature of light. Light, of course, is all around us. When there is light, we need it to see. But why bother at all? Why is there all this mystery about lighting? Why not just get lots of lights, great big bank of them, turn them all on, and there you go. We've got light. Let's go. Just why is there all this mystery surrounding lighting? Properties of light. You have intensity. We're talking about how much light there is. So do we have a big light, a small light? Is it midday? Is it in the morning or at dusk when there's relatively more or less light? So, of course, light needs to be at a good enough level to work with the medium you're working with. You might find that if you're working with film, you'll need a little bit extra light. That obviously depends on the sensitivity of the stock, of course. You'll find that digital systems don't need as much light in terms of rendering a picture, but you may find that they require more light than film if you're trying to recreate the look of film. So don't be tempted to think that because these modern cameras are more sensitive, that they'll give you a great picture without having an equivalent amount of light to what you might need if you were shooting on film. Of course, different levels of light affect the mood and the focus of a piece as well. Contrast. This is quite an important aspect of cinematography. Light and shade. The difference between these two is really what is the essence of a lot of pictures when you're photographing people, places, objects, etc. It's about getting that contrast right, and that contrast can portray or convey a mood. In fact, it can carry almost the entire weight of the emotion inside a picture or a scene or a shot. And don't forget again that different mediums have different contrast ranges. Back to what I was just saying about the level of light that you might need when shooting on digital or film. You certainly have to take that into account with contrast. Regards contrast ratio, that's how much light I can see and how much dark I can see, across the spectrum. Film has a relatively large contrast ratio. Digital acquisition formats a bit less, but humans have quite a huge contrast ratio. So, in other words, if you were to step out onto a bright day, you would probably be quite able to see the detail in a shadow underneath the car, for example, maybe the rocks and the texture of a shadow underneath the car. But you would also be able to see the detail in the highest highlights, for example, and the reflections of that car on the bonnet. You may have to squint to look directly at the sun, which you probably shouldn't do anyway, but you can see what I'm trying to say here is that the human eye can appreciate a lot of contrast. In fact, the equivalent to around 24 stops if we equate that to a camera system. So the light must be consistent, that's quite important, and angles must be lit evenly. So if you're going to create a scene where you have two people talking to each other and you're shooting in a one camera setup, so you have to switch, you need to make sure that the light is consistent and you don't change the light at all, so that might detract from the action or the emotion in the scene itself. So it's important that lighting is inconspicuous. Lighting must suit the production techniques. So you have to think about camera shadow. Now, obviously, when you're setting up a scene, and you're working with a director in blocking out a shot at the start of your production, you need to think about things like this, so that if you do have say a camera move during your piece, that you haven't set a light up that's in the way when you're just scribbling down your notes on paper, but of course one that maybe isn't behind the camera, that the camera will then move in front of to create a shadow and things like that. So it's important to be aware that the lighting needs to suit whatever you're doing with regards to the shoot itself. And of course you have the problem of actors moving near lights. So if you have a scene where actors are moving around, you need to make sure that you know the full extent of their movement. Again, when you're blocking with the director, or if you're doing the cinematography and directing yourself, just be aware that because of the way that light works, that if an actor goes near a light, he will start to get a lot brighter. So yeah, take that into consideration. And again, carrying on from that, positioning lights based on the action. So just make sure that these lights are intelligently placed around the set, and you're not fouling actors and creating shadows and getting overly bright, etc. Inappropriate lighting. Now, I've always said that there's no such thing as bad lighting, really. If you've got some lights and you switch them on and you can see what's going on, then technically you've done the job. Now, that's okay as a statement and as a generalisation, but of course that's not really true. And, you want people to look as nice as they possibly can. You want to light things in a way that invokes emotion, that makes people look as good as they possibly can, and also maybe draws you in to what's going on, so that you don't get distracted by overly bright backgrounds that immediately would catch your eye, so that you miss maybe what the director intended you to see at the start of that shot. So flat or over contrasty lighting is often a bit nasty looking. There's the wrong light for the situation. Say, for example, you have two people sat next to a large window in a cafe, and rather than allow the natural light, or maybe you might use artificial light outside the window to control it, you might have a bounce board or some additional lights opposite the window on the other side of them that cancel out the nice sort of shadowy effect that you'll achieve with that soft natural light coming in the window, that will give people a very much a three-dimensional modelled look on its own. So yeah, you don't want to look as if there's another window there on the other side of them that isn't really there, and detracts from what might be a quite nicely naturally lit scenario into something that looks horribly artificial. Unsuitable lighting. So carrying on from what I just said, lighting that looks artificial. If I'm lighting somewhere, then I'm trying to see wherever possible I can use natural light and use practical lights. In other words, lights that actually appear in the scene. For instance, a table lamp or a light that's in the ceiling, and try and either use those in their own right, or possibly just augment them, and only look for achieving some special looks if that's required. Good lighting, of course, adds realism. Straight away, if you look at some films from the 40s and the 50s, you'll see that the lighting doesn't look real. For example, look at Mary Poppins. Some of the scenes there that are inside the house are just so massively overlit that it just doesn't look like a home at all. It just looks like a set that's got 20,000 watts of light poured onto it. You look at a film nowadays that's been shot inside a house, and it will look totally different. People have got to grips with the realism side of lighting, and that of course knocks on into the believability and the emotion carried in the scene. And of course, good lighting is not noticed either. You don't want to be watching a film and be constantly aware that the lighting's not consistent. You may not even realise that there's something wrong, but quite possibly it's because the lighting is not correct, and that's setting the scene off kilter and giving you this feeling that things aren't quite right. So light should create a suitable ambience. Atmosphere and environment should suit the mood. When we're talking about suitable ambience and environment, maybe back to what I was saying about the two people who were sat down in the cafe window having their little romantic chat. You don't want to kill a mood that's like that with inappropriate lighting. Maybe we could shift them away from the window and put them in just a very subtly candlelit scene in the middle of a restaurant or something. You don't want to starkly light that. So that it just loses all its vibe. You need to think about what makes a nice candlelit scene. What makes it is the darkness. It's the places that aren't lit. So that's you need to think about that when you're approaching this. That follows on, of course, to lighting dictating the appearance of something. Of course it does. It's what allows you to see it. And it can make people look ugly, mysterious, beautiful, dark or crude, depending on where you put your lights, depending on what type of a fixture that you use, depending on maybe the gels that you use, maybe a diffuser. It can change the whole look of someone. And we may see this a bit later. I'll give you some examples of just where putting a light, in a particular position can change the whole mood of a particular shot. As we've discussed already, bad lighting can detract from the content of the film, and the average film viewer may not know why it is. Why are they feeling uncomfortable? What's wrong with this scene? And conversely, of course, you could use that in your favour, and you can use light to create an uneasy or awkward feeling if that's what the director so desires. What can light do? Let's have a look at this. Two panels here. Now this is taken with the same camera with identical sources of light. The top one has a diffuser on it and the light is directly above looking down. This is just a piece of carpet. Now if I angle the light down and put it nearly on the floor and take the diffuser away, we immediately get this the texture reveal, if you like. Which is quite nice. So you can see there, just with one light, by taking a diffuser off and by moving it around at another angle, we change the look of an object. Light can reveal or it can conceal. Now I suppose you could say that could also be a lack of light as well. Now look at these two shots here of this guy. The top shot I've used light to conceal because I've overexposed it, so you can't see his features. And then you could also argue that I've used a lack of light to conceal the back of his head. We don't know where the back of his head finishes. We don't know what he's wearing, for example. In the bottom shot, I've reduced the brightness of that key light, and I've also added a little kicker at the back there, just so you can see where his head is, and it defines his shape a little bit more. So light can reveal and light can conceal, and lack of light does the same. Gradation, form and contour. Now this is quite an interesting shot, this. We can learn a lot from this shot, and you can see how the photographer has used the light to really bring out the contours in this car. I think this was a BMW concept car that weighed next to nothing because it was made from a thin wire body with material stretched over it. But if we look at this, we can pretty much tell where the light's been positioned. I mean, there are obviously other lights in the scene that have been used to fill. And of course, it's in a white, possibly a white infinity cove. So we've got light bouncing all over the place anyway. But I would suggest that the key light there is probably placed at about 2 o'clock in relation to the picture there, shining downwards. And that's pretty evident because of the shadow. You can see the shadow just slightly offset, coming across to sort of 7, 8 o'clock. And you can see there that the panel on the right-hand side of the bonnet is the brightest, and that's the one that's obviously shining towards the light. So as I was saying about looking at photographs and trying to work out where lights are, and how a photographer has got a particular look. You can do that quite simply. You may not get the exact look because there's probably a lot more going on there, but you can certainly get the ballpark. You can get a key light positioned, and then you can then work on fills and kickers and backlights and stuff just to get the look that you wish. So again, you can use light and no light to suggest what is not there, as in this example here. It's very difficult to work out whether this is a male or female. We don't know anything about them, what they're wearing, who they are, just from this one shot. So it kind of pulls you in, it's intriguing. And they're looking right at the camera as well. And I find that quite an interesting shot. So light can change the colour and the mood of subjects. A lot of this can be done in camera. Some photographers like to deal with it with gels and stuff on the lights, or different types of light. And you can see here an identical shot. The top is warm and the bottom is cold. The top shot has a more orangey, warm feel to it. Now, orange, warm, reds, they all kind of invoke that warm feeling for obvious reasons. And the bottom shot is blue and it's very cold, and of course the same things apply there. And the reason that we look at these things that are blue and appreciate them as being potentially cold. You can use light to suppress all detail. Now, this effect is actually achieved in the camera, but of course you could set this shot up from scratch in a studio and make sure that you didn't have any light on the guy. Now, this is governed, of course, by the sky, so we're exposing for the sky. We can see that quite clearly, and as a result of exposing for the sky, because of the lack of light on the guy there, we're not seeing him. So you can use light to suppress detail in that instance. You can use light to guide interest. Here's an obvious example, just using a spotlight to pick out a guy who's maybe performing a solo on stage. This goes back to theatre, where you would have a spotlight that would just pick out the thing of interest on the stage. So yes, you can use light to guide the viewer in a scene. You can use light to imply a time of day, maybe even convey the weather in a shot. We can see here that by the position of the rays that the sun isn't quite at midday, so this may suggest to us morning. It may suggest to us that it's we've gone past noon and we're heading into the evening. So light can do a lot to suggest time of day. So light can create visual continuity in a scene. This has been used a lot by directors in the last sort of 10 to 15 years, where scenes and subjects are linked together by tones. We can see that in films such as Hero, which is a good example of using that method or that idea to tell a story. The other example that I like to give is the film The Descent, of the girls inside the cave where they meet up with these nasty creatures in the dark. When their torches die, they've only got flares left, and it's quite difficult to know where you are, because the groups of girls split up. It's difficult to know who you're with as the story jumps from one group to another. But the director's done a great job of using light to assist us, and so each group of girls has their own distinct flare colour, so at any one time we know who we are with in the film. So there are two examples of films that use colour to guide the narrative. Let's quickly nip back to bad lighting again, so we cover this completely. Bad lighting distracts attention, there's no doubt about that, and that's something that we don't want. It makes people look ugly or unattractive, or at least can make them look ugly or unattractive. It can prevent us from seeing properly. A lot of time I see films where important parts of the story are featured, but just not lit adequately, so that you're often left guessing because of that. It's not been lit properly. Light can obviously create the wrong mood. If we go back to our nice candlelit dinner with our two characters in the restaurant there, you can see that if we were just to switch all the lights on, maybe even leave the candles burning for effect, we would lose all the vibe in that scene. And rather than the people being the subject, we might get distracted by people at the back of the room, or waiters walking around and constantly taking our eye off what should really be the centre of attention. So we don't want to create the wrong mood with light. And also, bad lighting can make the set look artificial. If you have got a set that's been made, quite often for reasons of budgetary constraint or other reasons, you may not have made the set as good as you possibly could. So lighting can help there. And you don't have to overly light something that may not need to be lit anyway, and to highlight the possible shortfalls in your set design or your set build. Lighting routines. 3-point lighting. Good old 3-point lighting. I guess if you've had anything to do with filming at all, even photography, you probably would have heard of 3-point lighting at some stage. It's a well-established form of routine lighting for film and video and has its origins in theatre. Although it does represent artificial lighting, its intention, of course, is to place the subject in its best light. And you'll see that 3-point lighting is very valid and is used extensively in filmmaking today. If used correctly, the principle can cover virtually all standard lighting situations. So let's break this down. Normally you would have a key light. This represents your first light of the three. So this is the main light source, and this could be representing the sun. It might be representing a practical light in the shot, or it might just be a light that you can't see, but that's providing the main source of illumination for your shot. The second lamp, now this fills in the shadows created by a key light. Now we're taking for granted here that we're working in a black room. We've lit our first light, and of course that's going to cast some nasty shadows. So the second light is used to fill in those shadows created by the first light. The third light, a backlight, a hair light, sometimes called a kicker, various different terminologies for that light depending on what country you live in and where you're from and what your background is. But essentially it's to provide some lift from the background and to give them some shape and an edge. And traditionally as well, that third lamp is often overexposed, so we don't often see detail in that light. You might often hear it referred to as a rim light too. So here's a quick illustration of that setup. You can see our objects in the middle there. Key light in this instance is on the left. The key light can be on the left or the right. Again, that might be dictated by windows, by practical lights in the scene. So for instance, if we had a large window to the right in this instance, we wouldn't put our key light on the left, we put it on the right, and we would try to bolster or mimic or imitate that light coming in the window. Also, don't forget that these angles aren't strict, and the heights as well. We can't see the heights of the lights in these images here. They're not strict either. You're looking at getting a nice looking shot at the end of the day. So the heights, you can just mess around with them, and I suggest that you do that. So we've got our fill light on the right. That's light number 2, filling in our shadows. You might want to move that round a little bit further than that one. And then our backlight or hair light. You might often see people put these hair lights directly behind people. You can get various bits of support and grip that will allow you to place a light directly behind someone, so that you haven't got stands in the way, at the back. You might want to fix them to a truss above their heads, but they all do the same job, and that's to provide some kind of contrast or lift from the background. So let's have a quick look at this in action. Here's one I prepared earlier, to coin a phrase. We're in a black room, and I've just positioned my key light. So you can see it's lighting up quite a fair bit, but it is casting those nasty shadows on the right-hand side of his face. So let's add in our second light, and there you go, that's filled in our shadows. You may argue that's filled in too much. It might be a little bit overly flat, meaning that we're not really providing as much modelling as we could. Now, this is totally subjective. It depends entirely what you're doing. Again, it's all about mood. It's all about making the lighting suit what's on the script, whatever. You need to be constantly thinking about all these things. But in this example, I decided to balance it as so. So let's add in our next light. And you can see there, this is our hair light or kicker. Now, I haven't put this behind this guy. I've just put it to one side. Like I say, again, totally subjective. Depends on the situation. Put it where you like. But I've used it there because this guy had really nice black reflective hair, and I thought that positioning it there would do the job quite adequately. So there's an example of our 3-point lighting. Now you can do 4-point lighting, of course, if you've got a bag of 4 lights. Now what I've done here is I've removed the black backdrop, so we're using a white backdrop here, and I'm just relying on the light from the existing 3 lights that we started with to fill in the backdrop, so you can see it's quite grey. And then what I've done with the 4th light is I've put a gobo over it. A gobo is a little device that sits in front of the lens of the light, or the open face of the light, depending on what type of a light you're using. Generally used in spotlights. They don't work particularly well with soft lights. And it just gives just throws a shape on the wall. And that can be any shape you like, trees, shapes, triangles, squares, whatever. You can make your own out of tin foil or out of black wrap. No problem at all. Just insert them in. You might have to play around with them to get them looking right, but yeah, you can make your own. This particular one was a set of dado gobos, and they were actually fitted to a dado light as well. So our 4th light is providing us with a nice, interesting background. You'll notice as well that because we've got the white background opened up now, that bounces a lot more light around in the scene, and we were in an infinity cove here, so it does kill some of the modelling that we've got going on. And in fact, I've adjusted some of the lights here to compensate for that. So 3-point lighting can be used on a single subject, and it can be used right up to an entire stage full of cast members, and you'll see this quite often at the theatre if you go. And the routine is simply repeated to cover larger areas with lots of keys, lots of fills, and lots of backlights. Okay, let's have a look at the types of lamps that are on offer these days. If ever you get a book on lighting, you need to make sure that it's roughly contemporary. Some of you guys may be familiar with some of the books out there that are doing the rounds, the old industry standards. For instance, the one by Gerald Miller is a favourite. Now, sadly, although it's a fantastic book in terms of showing you what light can do and all the lighting routines, it's woefully inadequate when it comes to the type of light that's currently available. So let's talk about these. On the left-hand side there, we've got an open face light. These are often referred to as redheads. They come in a variety of different wattages. Standard wattage is around 800. You can see they've got barn doors on there, and they're normally coloured red. That's why they're called redheads. Just an industry term that's been kicking around for decades. Yeah, so these are open face, and they normally got a grill or a mesh in front of them to protect you from flying glass if the bulb decides to let go. Moving along to the middle light, we have what's called a Fresnel. Now, you may be familiar with Fresnels if you've ever seen a lighthouse. It's the lens that's in front of the lamp that concentrates the light into a very powerful beam. I'm not exactly sure on the history of them, but I believe they were invented by a French guy at the end of the 19th century. Employed by film lighting extensively. This particular Fresnel is an ARRI, possibly a 2K. You'll find that Fresnel's on lights as low as 150 watts, and they go right up to 20, maybe even 25k. On the right hand side we have a dado light made by a chap called Mr. Dado. That's where they get their name. These are Oscar winning lights, by the way. They've won Oscars for their innovation, partly because of the way they're built, but mostly because of the lens that's in the front of them. A fantastic bit of innovation there that allows you to use a very low wattage bulb, but that gives you the equivalent of around 150 watts. They're great little lights. You can also use them in conjunction with some lens accessories that fit on the front that enable you to take the light almost down to a pinpoint. In fact, I've even seen them used to light up individual jewels on expensive watches. So yeah, they're very good. Come in various sizes. You can get much bigger ones than this. I think they come in sort of 400, 650, maybe even 1,000 watt sizes. And the other great thing is that they've got some inbuilt colour temperature switches on them, and of course they've got dimmers. That's a really great thing about these lights, and they've got a spot and flood facility as well. In fact, all of these lights here, they will be deemed spotlights, and they've all got the ability to spot or to flood. So they're your hard spotlights. They give you a very distinct kind of a look. They'll give you very deep shadows. They'll give you very intense highlights, very cutting lights, and they obviously have their uses. Now, next up we have these type of lights. These are by a company called KinoFlow, relatively new on the scene as far as cinema goes, and they give you a very soft, almost shadowless light. Now you can get, of course, soft light bounced from a board. You can even bounce these lights as well, but these lights work great as they are, really nice and soft. On the left-hand side, we've got a Vista beam, and on the right-hand side, we've got a Diva. Diva lights are fantastic. Never get enough of these lights, and the way that they make people look so great. So yeah, the actresses love these lights. These are based on traditional kind of fluorescent technology, but they're not to be confused with traditional fluorescent lights. They're very carefully made. They're all colour balanced. You can buy different tubes for different types of colour temperature, and they also work off of a ballast system, so you get a constant light. If you're working with high speed photography, you'll find that although these lights aren't particularly bright for that sort of application, they do give you a constant light even at obscene frame rates. So yes, the KinoFlow soft lights are absolutely fantastic, and I use them wherever I possibly can. Next up, we get to the big boys, the carbon arc or HMI fixtures. These are for lighting huge areas. You'll often see them used to replace the sunlight through the window. You'll often see them used for night shots if you want to have a fake moon on top of a crane somewhere. If you look at some examples of the night shoots they did on Lord of the Rings, you'll see that they probably had no end of these lights all stacked up somewhere on a big array. And also, if you get a chance to see the film Super 8, that's a really nice example of using these lights in a nighttime scenario. In fact, the DOP on that film has managed to light quite an immense area with these lights. So, the selection of a lamp depends on the type of mood you wish to create and how that fits into what light will be available in the actual scene. So again, this is going back to the practical light situation. You know, if you've got a light hanging down in the shot that you can see on camera, then you would, wherever possible, try and just accentuate that to augment that light and to try and obviously extend the characteristics of that light. So you wouldn't, for example, put a harsh spotlight to augment a nice soft incandescent bulb. So again, you need to follow these routines and, you know, try and keep things as natural as possible. And just think, if you were lighting, let's go back to our scene with the guys sitting in the cafe window. If you wanted to control the light there on a possibly cloudy day, you would want the light coming through there to be quite hard, just as sunlight is. Sunlight is a hard light, so you would use your spots, your Fresnels, your open face style of light, as opposed to a soft light, which would give you, you know, a very diffused kind of light. You could argue that it might be a cloudy day outside and you want to carry on with that cloudy theme because the scene after, when you shoot outside, it's cloudy. So, you know, these are decisions that you have to take virtually day by day, week by week when you're shooting, so that you provide a continuity of light to to the overall production. So yeah, you need to bear these things in mind. So select the appropriate type of light. And this all goes back, of course, to ensuring that you light realistically for your scene. So yes, I mean, I covered it already, but when selecting a light, you need to consider the quality of light. Is it hard or soft, and what's the colour of the light? And you need to match that wherever possible with your artificial lights. Intensity. How bright or how dark is your light? Again, this will have a bearing on what type of a light you select, because KinoFlow lights, your Divas and your Vista beams and your Parabeams, although they give this beautifully soft light, they don't throw light very far. And don't forget, you have your inverse square law. if you're interested in reading up on that. I'm not going to cover it here, but you should really understand the inverse square law when it comes to lighting and just how quickly that light falls off. So you could possibly use a diffused hard light as opposed to a soft light, a soft Kino flow style light, if you wish your light to penetrate into a scene, to carry on for a fair way before it dies off. If you need to light up a large area, you need to understand how much light you get out of a particular fitting. How far will it go? If you've got a red head and you're in a room, you might find that you'll need 3 red heads to light that room up, if you're maybe bouncing it off a ceiling or something, because one might not be enough. It just the spread isn't there. So again, it's about understanding light fittings as much as anything. And then, of course, that knocks on to the control of the light. Do you need to cut down the amount of light that's coming out of a particular fitting with a flag, or maybe you need to dim it? You need to understand the implications of dimming a light when it comes to the reach of it, a possible change in colour temperature as well. Lighting styles. Now, there are 3 fundamental lighting styles for me. Now, this may not be, again, as I said at the start, this is my presentation. I'm making it. I wrote it. So, as far as I'm concerned, there are 3 styles, and I've tried to distill these down into something that's easily digestible. Of course, there are other ones outside of this, but I've tried to group them into 3 distinct styles. We have a high key, Chiaroscuro, and silhouette. So let's have a look at these 3 fundamental lighting styles. High key is a style of lighting where the picture is essentially flat, and they try to eliminate the shadows wherever possible. And what often happens is that wherever there are shadows in this style, you'll find that they're absolutely black because they've managed to evade all the lights that they've piled into the shot. And what you find is that there's no real attempt at modelling. You could also argue that any fill lights that are on the set are just pumped up as much as the key light, and everything's brighter than everything else. You'll find this style of lighting used in fashion shows or dance pieces. You'll see it used in lots of films from the 40s, 50s and 60s, all those classical big Hollywood numbers. In fact, the high key style was very much relative to that era. Again, I can use Mary Poppins, Oklahoma, any of those kind of big production numbers where they just piled in as much light as they possibly could. A great example of high key, sometimes described as Notan. Notan's a Japanese style of art that also falls under the sort of remit of high key, if you like. And The Wizard of Oz is as good an example as any of high key lighting from that classical Hollywood era. Chiaroscuro. Now, you may not have heard of this word before, but I like this word, and I think it really sums up this particular style of lighting. And it's to be found in all real modern films throughout some stage of the production. In fact, you'll see it throughout filmmaking, really. But it's particularly been employed in the last, say, 30 years or so, where the emphasis is on dimension, and you're trying to make people look as real and as three-dimensional as possible in a shot. The aim is for solidity and depth and progressive tonal gradation, form, shadow, and of course the textural control of a subject. A fantastic example of chiaroscuro lighting, where you have this modelling effect, is in Barry Lyndon, where he tried to shoot everything by candlelight. Well, that was when it was inside anyway. He tried to, wherever possible, to use what lighting would have been present at that time. And in fact, when Kubrick found out that he couldn't shoot this as he intended, when he first proposed this film, he actually went and modified some Zeiss lenses, I believe, that were used on the Apollo missions that were made specifically for that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he managed to create a lens, back engineer a lens that went down to about 0.7 with regards to the f-stop on that. So an amazingly fast lens. I mean, the picture's still very grainy, but yeah, he managed to pull that off in camera and without any real additional lighting there. Silhouette. So we've seen an example of this already. It's a style of lighting where all the detail in the subject is suppressed, and it just leaves you a solid black object against some form of lighter background, whatever that may be. The impression, of course, from this lighting style is very flat and two-dimensional, and the treatment is usually left for a mysterious or a dramatic effect. There's some lovely examples of silhouette filming in Saving Private Ryan that I really like. Just after they've taken the German emplacement, I think a couple of the guys get shot and they end up having to bury him. And there's this lovely scene as the sun's going down with the guys in silhouette digging the grave and putting the guy into it. And yeah, just a fantastic use of silhouette in my opinion. Pictorial Effect. So let's have a look at this now. This is kind of drilling down a little bit further into these lighting styles, really. We have very low key, we have low key, we have high key, and we have very high key. So let's have a look at how these play out. So very low key, the black areas dominate, and this is often described as film noir. It conveys a very sinister overtone into the picture. Low key, midden grey and black tones dominate. The subject often has a very sombre air about it, but not quite as dreary as very low key or film noir. This style can be comforting and cosy, as well as heavy and tragic. So it has a double meaning, or a double potential, if you like, when you're approaching a scene. High key, we've already looked at this in a way. It's often the standard way of lighting a lot of scenarios. Mid-grey and white tones dominate, and it has a feeling of lightness and overall happiness. Very high key. Most of the picture is very, very light greys and white. Of course, we've got colours in there, but this is the sort of dominant tones. The style conveys an openness, possibly simplicity or delicacy, or it's often used to communicate ethereal moods, of course used in dream sequences and scenarios like that. So there you go, that concludes my little introduction to lighting. Hope you enjoyed it. Please post some comments down if you feel they're relevant. Always open to criticism. I hope you were able to take something from this introduction to lighting, and I wish you a long and happy cinematographic experience.